In the world where everyday people face cruel oppression and abuse, how do we distinguish the ethical values that are supposed to establish a more society free from these oppressions? On a daily basis, people commit countless crimes, ranging from misdemeanors like minor shoplifting, possession of marijuana, to felonies such as rape and homicide. According to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the homicide rate increased by 17.1% from 2013 to 2017, reaching an estimate of 17,000 recorded homicides. More specifically, in judicial court systems, how is a justified punishment decided for these people who committed crimes that affected the lives of others around them? The Oxford Dictionary defines ethics as the moral principles that govern a person's behavior or the conducting of an activity. Using ethics, how do we establish a valid sentence for these crimes given the circumstance of each case? Is there a communal set of moral beliefs that judges are supposed to reflect? Given that the claims of a court are supposed to reflect the ethics of a particular community, what is the validity of these claims? First, we must delve into the various ethical theories to understand the most common moral perspectives judges may hold.
There are two distinct schools of thought in ethics: utilitarianism and Kantian ethics. Utilitarianism emphasizes that an individual acts upon what would serve the greatest good for the greater number. The actions of an individual are considered to be right if they increase happiness. Judges might reflect aspects of utilitarianism when the perpetrator is also a victim, him or herself, coming from an abusive childhood or preceding events that caused that crime. In these cases, the judge may prescribe accommodations such as mental facilities or programs that will help that defendant, while at the same time providing justice for the prosecutor or the main victim of the crime. The ethical decision of the judge was made to satisfy justice for both of the parties. On the other hand, Kantian ethics is considered duty ethics. This theory states that for every right that one also has a duty as well. For instance, if you have the right to property, then you should not steal another's land. Kant emphasizes that moral values are mainly based on motives rather than consequences, and so you should base your morals more on reason than on feelings. Judges may reflect aspects of Kantian ethics that prioritize reason as opposed to feelings. This is essentially a standard already set for judges to morally decide the sentence, looking at cold hard facts as opposed to letting their feelings decide for them. However, in some cases, there is a need for a judge to be lenient and to be appealed by emotions, especially when the defendant has faced unjust circumstances prior to the crime. These two perspectives can be seen in the factors that are considered in determining sentences.
Most crimes are specifically enumerated in constitutions or statutes, and the provision that identifies the specific crime will also identify the appropriate punishment. The U.S. Constitution's 8th Amendment provides that excessive bail should not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. Moreover, Title 18 of the United States Code, Part 2, Criminal Procedure, Chapters 227, Sentences, 228, Death Sentence, and 232, Miscellaneous Sentencing Provisions, also governs sentencing in federal courts. Similarly, state court sentencing procedures are governed by state laws and constitutions. For example, a statute may read, "Violation of this statute constitutes a misdemeanor, punishable by a fine not to exceed $500 or imprisonment not to exceed 30 days, or both." Given this range of potential punishment, a judge will then consider certain aggravating or mitigating circumstances to determine where along the prescribed spectrum a particular criminal's punishment should fall.
Factors such as being a first-time or repeated offender, or being an accessory to the crime, or whether someone was hurt in the act of the crime, all seem to fall under Kantian ethics when the judge is making his decision. He or she will then make his decision based on the factual evidence provided to him. On the other hand, utilitarian ethics may have influenced a judge to see the behaviors of the offender and things that weren't necessarily factual evidence presented to the court, and taking into consideration more of the background of the offender. As can be seen, commonly shared perspectives, utilitarianism and Kantian ethics play into these judicial factors, some being more reason-based circumstances, while others are more emotion-based, taking into consideration some of the background of the person committing the crime. This can be further analyzed in the case of Gypsy Rose Blanchard.
Gypsy Rose Blanchard is a 27-year-old who is currently serving 10 years of prison for murdering her mother. The reason for such action goes back to Gypsy's childhood. Gypsy was born in Golden Meadow, Louisiana on July 27, 1991. Her father, Rod Blanchard, divorced her mother, Claudia, or more known as Dee Dee, before Gypsy was born. Despite being a perfectly healthy and normal baby girl, Dee Dee insisted Gypsy needed a heart monitor that she would have to wear while she slept, because she stopped breathing in her sleep, or she would have seizures in the middle of the night. Blanchard stated Dee Dee never left them alone. They were always supervised by Dee Dee. By the time Gypsy was 8 years old, Blanchard states Dee Dee told him that Gypsy had leukemia, was paralyzed, had muscular dystrophy, she needed a wheelchair, and now had a feeding tube. After Hurricane Katrina ravaged their home in Slidell, Louisiana, Gypsy, then 14, and her mother moved to Springfield, Missouri, where they eventually settled into a house built by Habitat for Humanity. The home even had a wheelchair ramp for Gypsy to use. Gypsy said her mother didn't work, but the two were able to survive on Social Security, disability checks, and food stamps. Medicaid covered Gypsy's medical expenses. Later, I found out that my father was paying child support for the whole time, Gypsy said. As time went on, Dee Dee began exerting more control over her, Gypsy said. It would go into an argument that would last a couple of days, or it would be something where she wouldn't feed me for 2 days or so, Gypsy said. It started to be physical in 2011. She would hit me with a coat hanger sometimes. But Gypsy never fought back, she said, because I was afraid to. Gypsy says she once tried to run away, but Dee Dee found her a few hours later and severely punished her. She physically chained me to the bed and put bells on the doors and told anybody that I probably would have trusted that I was going through a phase and to tell her if I was doing anything behind her back, Gypsy said. In 2010, though Dee Dee had told everyone Gypsy was 14, Gypsy was 19 years old, and she knew she wasn't sick. She'd known for a while, and ever since then, she'd been attempting to escape from her mother. Gypsy began using the internet after Dee Dee went to bed to meet men in online chat rooms. Though her mother chained her to her bed and threatened to smash her fingers with a hammer when she found out, Gypsy continued to chat with men, hoping one of them could save her. Finally, in 2012, she met Nicholas Gojon, a 23-year-old from Wisconsin, and ChristianDatingForFree.com. He had no history of violence. His only prior arrest was for lewd conduct in 2013 at a McDonald's where he had been watching pornography on a tablet. Gypsy said she was in love, but she knew her mother wouldn't approve, and so she kept her relationship a secret, while she plotted to have her mother and Nicholas meet. Later, Gypsy and Nicholas began plotting to kill Dee Dee, exchanging text messages that police and prosecutors would later uncover in their investigation. Nicholas checked into a local motel while Dee Dee took Gypsy to a routine hospital appointment, and he waited until Gypsy let him know that they had returned and her mother had gone to bed. Gypsy let Nicholas in, handed him gloves and duct tape, and then passed him a knife. She believed he wouldn't go through with the plan. Unfortunately, he did. Gypsy said that while she hid in the bathroom, Nicholas went into her mother's bedroom and stabbed her to death. After Dee Dee was dead, Nicholas and Gypsy said they had sex on Gypsy's bed before taking a cab back to Nicholas's motel room. Gypsy later said that the sex began as consensual, but that it turned into rape, and that she only agreed to have sex with him because Nicholas at one point considered having sex with Dee Dee's corpse. Gypsy and Nicholas attempted to clean up the scene, took $4,000 in cash that Dee Dee kept in the house, and mailed the murder weapon to Nicholas's Wisconsin home.
I felt horrible about it. When me and her were in the hotel room, she kept on telling me, stop crying, stop crying. There's no reason to cry. It was my idea. It wasn't yours. Gojon told 2020 in an exclusive interview from jail. Gypsy comforted me about it. I prayed once I got here. I tried to get her mother's soul to forgive me. He said he went through with the plan because he thought he wanted to protect Gypsy and rescue her from her mother. Prosecutors contend Gojon arrived at the Blanchard home and went into Dee Dee's bedroom where she was sleeping on her stomach and stabbed her 17 times in the back. The prosecution argued that Gojon deliberated the murder on several occasions and acted on his own will. Officials shared murder evidence in court, including a curved knife with 6-inch blade and a bloody glove that Gojon evidently mailed to his home in Wisconsin after the murder. Gojon confessed to killing Claudine and said he considered raping her before the act. Gypsy and Gojan had sex in the house after Claudine was murdered, he said. In her first appearance in court, along with her then-boyfriend Nicholas Gojan, both were convicted for first-degree murder, and additionally, there would be a cash bail for $1 million, according to Missouri's set cash bail rule. However, in July of 2016, Gypsy pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, and thus serving a 10-year sentence. Gojan was charged in February of 2019 with first-degree murder, and as well as armed criminal action. The first charge received a sentence of life in prison. The second charge received a 25-year sentence to be served concurrent to the life. In the end, Gypsy stated, "There's a big difference between someone who asks to kill and someone that actually does it. Because I would never kill somebody. I would never physically go through with killing someone. I can't. I don't hate him. I don't feel sorry for him. And just as somebody could do something so heartless and not express remorse and not feel like he's responsible for it, he was very much like my mother in certain ways. And I feel like I was trained my whole life to do as I was told."
Now let's analyze the sentencing of both Gypsy and Nicholas. Gypsy was guilty of second-degree murder, which results in 10 to 30 years in prison. Gypsy only got the minimum sentence of 10 years in prison. The judge decided on 10 years given the circumstance of the case, her mental state being manipulated to follow orders, and the fact that she was solely an accessory to the crime and did not take direct action of the crime. On the other hand, Nicholas was guilty of first-degree murder, which was a mandatory sentence of life in prison without parole. He was found guilty of first-degree murder as a result of actively taking part of the murder and for acting upon his own will. However, Nicholas's defense attorney emphasized for a lower sentencing as Nicholas is diagnosed with autism. Thus, he has an irrational mental state which disables him from rationalizing decisions. Nevertheless, Nicholas's autism was tested by 2 psychologists. The first psychologist, Dr. Kent Franks, concluded that Nicholas had level 2 ASD, encompassing intellectual impairment. He asserts this could have prohibited him from rationing whether or not to kill Dee Dee. The second psychologist, Dr. Robert Denny, diagnosed him with level 1 ASD and claimed that he passed a judgment test he administered. It seems as the judge took little consideration in his disability due to Nicholas's confession of doubts within himself about whether or not he should commit the crime. In the end, Nicholas decided he would commit the crime in order to be Gypsy's hero.
According to the justice standards, do these sentences remain both true and valid, or are they simply just valid? Soundness is only applied to deductive arguments. In order for an argument to be sound, it must follow the 2 guidelines. The argument must be valid, and the premises of the argument must all be true. A sound argument is one where the conclusion cannot be false if the premises are true. The conclusion of a sound argument cannot be false, whereas an argument is simply valid when its conclusion follows logically from its premises. Let's look at the following examples. Example 1, Premise 1. Whales do not have fur. Premise 2. Whales are mammals. Conclusion. Therefore, not all mammals have fur. This is an example of a sound argument because it follows 2 guidelines. The argument must be valid and the premises of the argument must all be true. Example 2. Premise 1. You cannot teach an old dog new tricks. Premise 2. Celio is an old dog. Conclusion. Therefore, you do not teach Celio new tricks. This is not an example of a sound argument. This represents an argument that is solely valid. The first premise is false and the second premise is true. However, the conclusion follows the premises logically, which makes the argument valid. Now, relating it back to Gypsy's case. The judge's decision for Gypsy was made as the following. Premise 1. Gypsy did not directly murder her mom. Premise 2. Second-degree murder is 10 to 30 years in prison. Conclusion. Therefore, Gypsy will receive 10 to 30 years in prison. However, the judge's decision for Nicholas was made as the following. Premise 1. Nicholas premeditated and intentionally killed Dee Dee. Premise 2. Secondary murder is life in prison. Conclusion. Therefore, Nicholas will receive life in prison. Both arguments contain true premises, making it a valid argument. Thus, it is also a sound argument. Gypsy's circumstances gave way for a more utilitarian approach by the judges, whereas Nicholas' sentence was directly judged with Kantian ethics.
However, who decides what is true? We can define truth as a piece of information that an individual believes is true based on their belief or knowledge. Based on communal ethics in American society, punishments have been set in specific statutes and standards. For instance, the U.S. Code prohibits murder. Thus, it is unethical. However, in another society, murder may be considered to be ethical due to their codes or documentations. In conclusion, the validity of such court claims depend on the premises of the judge's arguments and communal ethics as outlined by specific statutes and standards.